Hello and welcome to the Business Innovation Center. This is one of our intellectual discussion programs that we have here at the Business Innovation Center in Fall River. We're happy to partner today with the Main Street Alliance, and we have a guest speaker that is going to share some great information about the elections and how this affects small businesses. So we're pro-business here at the Business Innovation Center. Please welcome Diane Painter. She's going to introduce our guests. Come on up, Diane. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you so much. So this is really exciting to be able to talk to folks and share with them about the elections and what it means for small business values. So first I want to just introduce Main Street Alliance a little. The Main Street Alliance is an organization that helps small businesses speak up on public policy issues, which may sound really boring, but actually it's just having a voice in the everyday things that go on in their lives. So saying in how the world should run and how the world should be, how our communities are created, what are the things that we put into them and get out of them, and have some action towards that. We work with mostly what we call socially responsible businesses that understand that their business health is connected to the health of the community, and who are thinking about things from both the ecological but also the actual effect that running a business has on people. So the reason we want to talk about the elections is that elections are change, right? Anytime there's a change in leadership, that means a change in power. That also means an opportunity for either new ideas or old ideas that need to be refreshed to come up again. So we saw in last week's election on November 6th that the Senate didn't change much, but understanding that there is a changeover in leadership and who is there is important, because the Senate is who is responsible for confirming Supreme Court judges. As we saw from the earlier this year, the discussion around the Kavanaugh confirmation, that when we think about Supreme Court judges, what their beliefs are and their histories, these are lifetime appointments, so they have a very long-lasting effect. And so who is in the Senate and who gets to make those decisions is very important. And how can we influence those people? Most people have been talking a lot more about the changeover in the House of Representatives at the national level. And in the national level, that change means that instead of Republicans having control of fiscal decisions, because all fiscal decisions need to begin in the House of Representatives, that they will now be originating with Democrats. So that means that in places like Massachusetts that has a lot of Democratic representation, that we have more opportunity to talk about what are the things that are important to us, especially when it comes to things like the budget. The elections can tell us more than that too. It can tell us sort of the temperature of what people are interested in, what are they talking about, what are people feeling. And so this example is that there are 4 Republicans that were actually involved in the House Ways and Means that had initiated the past Trump tax plan that had gone through, both the first version and the second version that came out earlier this year. And those folks lost. So we know that folks who were hearing that message, were seeing what those representatives were doing, were not necessarily happy with that. We also saw that for candidates that were talking about things like economic policies, that was, at least from the previous perspective of the GOP, that has not been resonating with folks. And the more that people ran on issues of economics, the more they lost. So if they were talking about the tax cuts that they were giving out, they were actually losing, because people care more about the national debt, and they care about the things that are going to affect their families and their communities long term, not a little bit of money, and depending upon who gets the money as well. So this is an interesting discussion of the airing of federal TV ads by party and issue, just to get an idea of when they looked at it, what were people winning on and what were people losing on. And actually, it's not just any particular type of voter, any particular party that is interested in making sure that we have economics that are talking about people's everyday lives, that are investing in the things they actually care about. They're talking, it was a high plurality of all party members, like if people were independent, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Everybody said they would actually be in this case, is by 61%, which is a huge amount, that they would be okay with, what do they call it? Turning back the tax cuts to help the deficit. So that's pretty big way for people to be talking about, is that we understand that we need to invest in more things rather than think about it as a time for cutting stuff, so cutting taxes especially. This is one of my favorite quotes that I think really, when we want to talk about the budget, sometimes it seems like something that's like academic or like numbers, and people are like, oh, I'm bad at math, I don't want to think about it. But this is something I agree with. The budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of our values and aspirations. And especially when we look at the national budget and the state budget, and even our personal budgets at home, when we look at what are the things, having a place to live is important, being able to get to work and transportation is important, education and however we invest in those things, investing in our own futures, those are our values, and we can use that same sort of feeling and understanding of budgets for the state and national as well. So when we talk about Main Street values, what are we talking about? So Main Street Alliance is made up of small businesses who actually run businesses. So most businesses are between 1 and maybe up to 100 people. It's a pretty big business. And when we talk about Main Street values, these are values that value health of people. So quality jobs, that's one thing, is making sure people have a safe place to work and they're getting paid a living wage. Embracing diversity, having a multicultural community and having all sorts of different types of people be part of their business. And so this is a map of the yes on 3 question, which is the question about whether to be able to exclude transgender people from public places like businesses. And Massachusetts overwhelmingly voted in favor of keeping the non-discrimination ordinance that we had in place before. And Main Street Alliance had dozens of businesses around the state who signed on also in favor of the non-discrimination ordinance, because they know that discrimination is bad for business, and have even personal experiences of being denied service and realizing that that's just not a good business value. And then really investing in our communities is another Main Street value, because when you understand that your neighbors and friends are also your customers, people who have that deep connection to individuals, they understand that what a good policy is one that looks back and to make sure they're giving back to the community, both as individual businesses, but really on a much more like policy, state and national level. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Main Street values and how we want to look at the budget. So we have invited Phineas Baxandall from Mass Budget and Policy Center, who has a lot of experience explaining the state budget, looking at how is revenue raised, how do we spend it, and what are the opportunities to make sure it actually represents our Main Street values. So thank you very much for coming today to Fall River to talk more to small businesses about some of the upcoming opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to be here. So I'll just start while Chris is loading this up by continuing where Dan had gone. We're talking about budgets as values. Budgets and values. People tend to think of budgets as just sort of long lists of these sterile numbers, or maybe they think about them as something that just politicians argue over, but they really are, I would say, perhaps more than anything else, moral documents. And that's the way to think of them, because a budget is where we as a community have to express our priorities, have to say, well, we're going to have more of this and less of that. Are we going to put more money in prisons or schools? Are we going to put more money in giving special special tax deals to this, or are we going to invest more in infrastructure here? And those are the kinds of trade-offs, the kind of real rubber hits the road kind of value statements, which are it's kind of getting past the rhetoric and getting to really what we care about as a community. And we at Mass Budget work on issues around the state budget and economic policy, especially as affecting low and moderate income people here in Massachusetts. And so coming from this and thinking about what a budget is, to think about sort of how does a budget affect community and what people care about in communities. And you think about, you know, the community that you live in and what are the kinds of things that you want for those communities. And so just going through some of those things and how they are related to the budget, you know, if you think about, you know, being in a community, you want a place which is going to have education system where people have the opportunity to flourish and thrive and be productive workers, and that's important for your small businesses here as well. And you know, you need transportation to be able to get around, to be able to get goods to market, to be able to, you know, guarantee that folks can get where they need to go, that you can get supplies, etc. You know, you want to be someplace where there's opportunities for recreation, for relaxation, for open space. These are the kinds of things we value in our communities. You know, we want it to be safe. We want there to be, you know, clean air. When we turn on the tap, we want real water to be coming out that we know is safe. We want the integrity of our legal system. You know, we want to have kind of world-class health care. We want the kinds of supports which keep us from getting sick in the first place. These are the things that, you know, matter to us as a community, and each of these are connected to the budget. You know, the human services that help when people fall onto hard times. These are all things which correspond to the kind of programs, the departments, the line items that are in the budget. And we don't necessarily think of them that way because they get talked about in these bureaucratic ways, but ultimately, with sort of the state budget being about values, it's about these kinds of things. So if you think of all these things that the state budget does together, and you think about how we raise this money, we raise this through, you know, through taxes, fees and taxes and such, and often ask people, how much do you think, if you took all the state and local, you know, the property taxes, the excise taxes, the income taxes, all at the state and local level together, and you put them together, what portion of all the income, the, you know, income coming to people in the state, do you think that would comprise? You know, is that like a third of the income? Is it like 1%? Is it? So I ask people, I get really, really different kinds of questions. So I'm going to ask Chris, what would you guess?
For which question?
For state and local taxes, as a part of all the income coming into the state, how much of it do we spend on state and local taxes, income?
Oh, geez, I have no clue.
I
should have a clue.
No. I won't. I just to move things along, it's about 10%. Right? So you put it all together, it's about 10%. And that may just seem sort of like, okay, 10%, is that high? Is that low? And so one thing people want to know is sort of compared to other states, is that high or is that low? And the answer is really that's average. You know, almost, you know, directly average. The Massachusetts, New Mexico, and the U.S. all round to 10.2%, the average amount of state local taxes. So we know that we're not an exceptional state when it comes to how much we tax as a portion of people's income is really the way to think about this. Are there ways that we are different or exceptional? And one of it is what has happened to our level of taxes. So if you look back at, you know, 1977, which is the first time we have really good figures for this, and then you look at it, the most recent figures of it, you see that we have some of the largest declines in the portion of income that go to taxes. You know, you can see here in Massachusetts, it's more than a quarter of that percentage point. You know, it was up close to 14%. It got cut down. As with the U.S., why there was a decrease during this time, but Massachusetts is kind of just about the biggest. You know, Arizona, where there's all of these teacher strikes and such, people have heard about, is a place which have cut more. Alaska, the Alaska can go towards the highest or the lowest on any given year, depending on what the price of oil is, because that's a lot of how they get their tax money. But the point is, this is something exceptional about Massachusetts, is how much taxes have been cut. And it's a real big feature when you think about life here and what's happened here. So a lot of it happened, part of it happened from Prop 2.5. So before I get into this, Prop 2.5, which limits how much a community can raise its property taxes, is a big reason for why Massachusetts taxes have been cut as a part. But the other part is at the kind of around the 2000s, people thought, the tech bubble, this is going forever. We don't sort of need to tax the way we did. This boom is going to last forever. Let's cut our income taxes. So they cut the tax rate. They cut the way we tax dividends and interest. They added some personal exemptions. All these things, which together mean about almost $4 billion a year less coming into the state to invest for all of those different things for our communities that we had talked about earlier. So this is a kind of context when you think about sort of what it has meant for our ability to invest in things for our community. So it's affected some of the ways we can do things. So if Chapter 70 is the main way that we give as a state money to communities for education, for K-12 education, you can see people will talk in sort of nominal terms. They'll say, oh well, we're spending a little bit more in education and a few million, but we're talking about almost a $5 billion budget. A few million might not even be enough to keep up with inflation. And so you look kind of over time, and it hasn't. Here's the most recent. We're actually in fiscal 19 right now. It started in July. That even though there was a $4 million increase in the money we're giving for education, we're still not, in the real value of that money, once you look at inflation, we're still not spending as much on K-12 education, even though we have a lot more people in the state as we were back in 1991, which is the earliest time we can get the, or not 91, sorry, 2001, which is when we have good figures for on this. And so general local aid is the main way we give money for everything from kind of local parks and roads and firefighters and such. And that money also, that's not coming up well on the screen, but here it is for the most recent figure. It's been a really major cut, despite the increases that have happened kind of steadily. When you look at it all, it's about a 40% decrease from where it was in 2001, following all these big income tax cuts. Early education and care, if you just looked at kind of the research on early education, we have an incredibly much greater understanding of how important it is in the first years of kids' lives, what a good investment it is to invest in good, high-quality care for people in those first years. So you'd think that perhaps that would be expressed in a greater investment over that time, but once you adjust for inflation, it's a decrease, about a 15% decrease in how much the state is investing in that since 2001. If we don't have the resources, we can't invest as much for it. Higher education, a similar story, about a 13% cut since 2001. And one of the ways that this matters for education is the kind of high tuition and fees that people face and sometimes choose not to face because of what that costs. And you can see it really dramatically in a per student way. Here we go. So as funding goes down, and the story I just told, this is what happened. This was the state funding story, and then this is what happened. If you compare 2001, 2008, you can see on a per student basis, funding went down $3,000 per student, and here's the tuition and fees from 2001. It went up even a little bit more because the costs at the universities have gone up a little bit higher and more students, etc. But so it's kind of a very direct effect in our lives of what it means for people. Other programs, public health, we're not spending as much. Environment and recreation, we're spending about 30% less. And all of these things matter for people's lives. Transportation can be a little bit more of a complicated story because a lot of it is invested indirectly through bonds and the capital budget, but it's similarly a story where one of the reasons we have such a kind of consensus in the state right now that there needs to be something done more for education, how, even though we're high ranked kind of on the top for things, for like healthcare, we're, towards the bottom on transportation is because we have we have almost, about 500 or so bridges that are structurally deficient. We have all the problems that happen with our public transit, etc. And this really matters. You hear some other, these aren't necessarily business leaders who represent most of the business people in the state, but it's interesting that they will talk about transportation as being a really top priority because it really matters. If you can't get things to market, if customers can't get to you, if you can't depend on that, then you can't run your business. And it's all kind of thing where penny what's that expression? That if you
Penny wise and dollar foolish.
Penny wise and pound foolish here, and that's there's statistics will say that average Massachusetts driver will spend something like $2,000 a year extra because of the poor quality of our roads, which at first I didn't believe. I was kind of like, okay, there's you get worse gas mileage, your tires wear out maybe earlier, but then I had to get a transmission fixed, and I said, okay, all right, if that happens every year because of the bad roads, I understand how these costs can be. Similarly, structurally deficient bridges, the state was going to see its 500 and so bridges get up to about 700 structurally deficient bridges. There was a big investment in the $3 billion accelerated bridge program, and now it's on its way down. It's kind of creeping back up from there now, but these investments matter for what we have here in the state. Here we go. So how do you invest in having a strong economy? What is needed? How do we bring in the revenues for it? There's a lot of confusion people have about, well, how about taxes? How does it matter for the economy? And so here's one way of measuring it. On the bottom is the level of taxes, that state and local taxes that we talked about before. It's measured slightly differently to be comparable with all states, but that's what it is there. And on the other side is the amount that an hourly wage can command in each state. So how productive is the economy for how much are people willing to pay for an hour of work in that economy? It's a way to say how productive, how sort of what is the kind of prosperity from coming from that, and how much do taxes matter with that? And you can see, well, first thing it tells you is you can see really nothing in terms of a pattern here. This looks like when my little kids would spit out their Cheerios on the table. It might come out in a pattern here. You've got high tax states, higher tax states with lower kind of productivity. You've got lower tax states. It's kind of all over the map. And you might say, well, come on, 50 states? What can you do with 50 states? Everything's got its own story. You're never going to have a consistent pattern when you have 50 states. But I'm going to show you something else now where we have it on the bottom, instead of taxes, we're going to have education. And there's no perfect way to say, well, what's the quality of education? But one way to do it is to say just what % of the population, the adult population, has a college degree. Imperfect measure, but a pretty good one. And you can see if you look at here for education, there is a pattern. There's a really clear pattern, and we can feel really good that Massachusetts is doing really well here. You can look at this and sort of rest on our laurels, or you can say, well, what if the other half of our population had a chance to go to higher education, or have a chance for really high quality vocational ed, or other kinds of opportunities? What could we do then? So the point is, though, that it really does matter. Taxes don't matter that much for the economy, perhaps not at all, but things like education, investing in education really does. Interesting thing on education is it hasn't always been that way. I'm going to show you now the same thing for 1979. Actually, it's not coming up very well, but this would be 1979. I'm not sure why on this computer the states aren't coming up. But it was a much more scattered pattern back in 1979. So if we are going to invest in things like education, things like transportation, how do we do it in a fair way? And the first way to think about that is just where is the money? Where is the money growing? And part of that story is just to think about what parts of who is seeing their incomes rise. right? So this is, back in the recent decades, we can see that if you're in the highest 1% of households, that orange line there, you can see pretty steady, strong income growth, averaging over 4% every year, about a tenth as much growth if you're in that lowest 90% where most people are of households have not seen their income grow once you're adjusting for inflation here. So some people might say, oh, well, that's just the nature of it. The rich get richer, that's the way it has to be. But if you look at kind of the previous generation, it wasn't that story, right? This is, there was really broad prosperity and growth, typically kind of faster growth even, but that was a different, it doesn't always have to be this way. There's been something which has gone on since around the 70s. I'm not even going to go through this because it's not coming up well on it. But the thing which is surprising to some people is that those who are have the highest income actually are paying a lower tax level. So here measured here you can see for the bottom 99%, and then you can see for the top 1% that there's actually substantially less taxes here for those who have the highest income are paying a lower tax rate than those who are kind of the rest of us. And some of the reasons for that are things like, it's missing billions, a couple $billion if they pay more in revenue would come here if they were paying as much as everybody else. Just say before I get into the Fair Share Amendment, just to talk for a moment about that, which is, if you think about taxes, things like sales tax, for instance, right? So sales tax, if somebody is really wealthy, they generally don't spend most of their income. It's getting put away in other places, it's trust funds, it's whatever. If somebody's really poor, they are they have to spend their whole income. They may have to spend more than their income because they're spending savings and things like that as well. So the portion of their income that they're paying on things like sales taxes, it may be that everyone pays the same sales tax, but the percent of their income is higher. The Fair Share Amendment is something I want to talk about here because it was a ballot question which is being talked about still as something which had been taken off the ballot because the court, to the surprise of a lot of people, interpreted the way it was written as violating some of the ways that had been stipulated back in 1918. And so, but people are talking about this is something that might get relaunched. So I was asked to talk about this, and what the Fair Share Amendment would do is basically it's an extra 4% on income, an income tax just on the portion over $1 million. So if you make under $1 million, it doesn't affect you at all. It would be about $2 billion in extra revenue to the state and it would be the way it had been on the ballot before. It was dedicated just to education and transportation. If it happens again, will it be dedicated exactly that way? Is something to see. To think about what this means as a percent, again, if you make $1 million, you're still paying the same 5% income tax that everyone else is. It's actually 5.05, but for simplicity of have it here is 5. If you make $2 million, your first million is paying that 5 million, and then your second million is at 9% because it has the extra 4. So on average, you're paying 7%. And nice to be able to say your second million. If you're not someone who's thinking about, well, in my second million, then this isn't something that affects you. And it isn't, despite the fact that a lot of people talked about it as a millionaire's tax, as a shorthand. It isn't actually anything about being a millionaire. If your uncle leaves you their beach house on the shore and you have $1 million in wealth, you're not subject to this tax. It's only about the income you get each year. So going through that, this is the actual language that it had on it. One thing we can learn from when we think about this is do other states have anything like this? 9%, is that high? Again, you know, being able to look at other states. Other states are different from us in that they often will have taxes at the local level on income. Here in Massachusetts, we don't have those kinds of local taxes. So here, the local taxes are in the blue and the state ones are in the green, and you can see there's a lot of other states, you know, California, which, you know, has Silicon Valley, New York, which has, you know, Wall Street and other things. These are not places where there's any lack of people earning high incomes. No one's talking about you know, all the millionaires fleeing Silicon Valley, but you can see these are places where there are taxes sometimes get up in, you know, well above 10% even, and you know, it's not some kind of untried experiment or something if this does happen. So this is something which it will do. Finally, when we talked about where the fair share amendment tax distribution was for the 99% versus the 1%, it's something where it will not quite make it equal if it's there, but it will close about half of that gap of how much the 1% are paying in taxes compared to everybody else. So I'm going to stop there, but thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to our conversation now.
Thank you.